It was to be a standard sweep along the valuable trade route that stretched across the Deneb to Gamma Cygni hyperlane jumps, a flotilla of corvettes and destroyers, accompanied by a lone cruiser. The latest courier messages had indicated some sort of trouble was brewing, with the local alien scum known colloquially as Marauders, void-born vagabonds that seemed to do little but war amongst themselves when they weren't sending out pirate armadas to raid nearby planets for food from their hodgepodge of starbases and orbital habitats that encircled the hawking black hole. The ancient Earth physicist, which the collapsed star had been named for, would be rolling in his grave if he knew that his legacy was home to such squatters. Not that the Commonwealth of Man was so concerned with the historic figures from their species' original homeworld. The higher-ups had determined that a simple demonstration of strength would be sufficient to quell any further incursions, and so star pilot Antonia Alvarez found herself in open formation as the military convoy passed through the roiling dust clouds of Gamma Cygni's colorful nebulae. Her patrol duties will last for many months as they navigated the dust clouds under nuclear thrusters. Hyperdrives were only useful far from gravitational fields, and this deep into the Gamma Cygni star system, fleets were forced to rely on the old Newtonian physics. The fuel was heated with a miniature star and some molecular chemistry, but action and reaction to generate thrust still ruled in the 22nd century. It worked well enough, but it also meant that around 90% of their travel time was spent crossing just these last few astronomical units. But Alvarez was never bored. Her strict training regime and custom-tailored drug cocktail kept her in a state somewhere between hyper-focus and meditative relaxation, controlled tension ready to spring at any moment. It was both thrilling and calm, and military scientists had found such states of mindfulness to be the ideal approach to a potential dogfight. Alvarez was just reassured knowing that if trouble started, her body would respond to it before her mind needed to process why. Her reaction time had been clocked at nearly 120 milliseconds, practically the physical limit for the human nervous system to respond to stimuli, a feat few but fighter pilots and professional gamers can hope to achieve. As for the other physical limits of humanity, thanks to technology, she had surpassed most of those too. Neural lace connected her mind directly to her starfighter and allowed her to fly the ship without the use of her arms during high-G maneuvers. Her blood was also altered, capable of storing 800 times more oxygen molecules than ordinary human hemoglobin. Even during extreme changes in momentum, her brain would remain oxidized for a time, even if most of her blood cells were pulled to her feet. In truth, most of her cardiovascular system was custom-built, reinforced with graphene mesh, and made to grow extra arteries in veins and hearts, all to ensure that consciousness did not slip away from her so easily as she endured 20 gravities or more in weight. Alvarez sometimes wondered how the tissue engineers had managed to fit it all in, but the results were undeniable. An ordinary human will crumble just above 9 gravities applied parallel to their spinal column. Alvarez, in a standard liquid G-suit, the kind that encased her torso and limbs in a water cocoon, could manage a vertical G-force around 22. But today she was flying under full liquid immersion. Her lungs and other cavities were totally filled with fluid, a special cocktail of perfluorocarbons that was paired with a membrane oxygenator installed in her face mask. The system did well enough to get the oxygen into her body, but getting the carbon dioxide out required running her blood through a small carbon-scrubbing implant in her thigh, a step up from the old artificial umbilical cord, which involved temporarily removing the lungs with surgery and relying on an external machine to perform their function. Going full liquid always made her feel a bit cold, and with that thought, the heating wires in her G-suit began to radiate some welcomed warmth, whatever discomforts the pilot might feel. Breathing in a viscous fluid, the performance results were worth the difficulties. Alvarez had the ability to push 90 Gs under full liquid, and doing so made her feel like Atlas holding up the sky. Out of the orange clouds of swirling, nebulous gases came a sudden flash. Before thought could tell her why, her back slammed against the rear of the impact chair as a heavy fusion burn pushed her towards the point of light at close to 40 gravities acceleration, enough to force her to rely on her ship's camera over her own eyes, which were temporarily squeezed out of focus. She already had a fresh pair growing in a vat back on her mothership. Simultaneously, her craft released a few dozen local control drones, simple robotic craft meant to distract and engage enemy spacecraft in a cloud around her main fighter, piloted through a combination of Swarm AI and Nathan Forrester, her ride-along drone pilot. Her reflexive instincts paid off, and the torpedo overshot her, chasing after one of the local control drones. The torpedo's AI managed to decipher the ruse and reacted, locking back onto Alvarez's thrusters, but reaction was all the missile had. Alvarez had imagination and prediction on her side, and she saw her victory already beginning to take shape. Her vehicle was slower and larger than the devastator torpedo, but it was also more fuel efficient and loaded to bear with local control drones and heavier weaponry. By flying towards the torpedo and dodging at the last second, she had turned her momentum into distance and forced the missile to waste precious fuel, slowing down to turn back around. Alvarez had enough fuel to fly for weeks. Her enemy did not, and the more the missile used its speed, the more it had to adjust its course, the more distracted it was by Forrester's swarm, the more fuel it burned, and the closer Alvarez inched towards ultimate triumph. Time was on her side, but Alvarez had something else on her side too. Just as the torpedo began to bank towards her position, a line of hot coil gun fire burst from one of the local control drones, ripping through the enemy vessel. She thought gratitude at Forrester and continued towards the next target. Fighter pilots have been a part of space battlefields in countless science fiction series, from Star Wars to Gundam and beyond. But as much of the idea of valiant fight pilots bringing their personal heroism and right stuff attitude to space combat has a romantic and idealistic appeal, the stark reality is that humans, as they are, simply cannot perform well under the forces generated by extreme acceleration. Soft tissues, such as blood vessels, can become severely stressed even under a few G-forces, with even 6G being enough to potentially injure a person, though the direction that the force is applied is also a factor. Humans tolerate force better if it is applied perpendicular to the spine, with some test subjects demonstrating consciousness and the ability to solve complex problems under 20 gravities sustained force, so long as it was applied horizontally. As an aside, a unit of G-force represents the force generated by Earth's gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. You experience 1 G of force standing on Earth's surface and up to 5 G on roller coasters, which is sometimes enough to cause a loss of consciousness. Training is also a factor in G-force toleration. Humans with muscular builds can contract their muscles to increase blood flow to the brain, and trained fighter pilots often reach up to 9 vertical gravities while fully aware and able to respond to an ongoing military engagement. Yet even with the best training, ordinary humans can never manage the G-forces felt by missiles, sometimes over 30 Gs, and autonomous craft simply outrun anything with a human pilot in the cockpit. Human reaction time is another glaring weakness. Our nerve impulses are chemically based and can only move at around 120 meters per second, whereas a brain based on electronics and computer technology can theoretically move information at the speed of light, 299,792,458 meters per second. As such, processing information takes far longer for a human pilot by many, many orders of magnitude than it would for an AI. If an organic pilot is both too squishy and too slow to keep up with an AI, what place do they have on the battlefield of the future? One intermediate scenario in which traditional pilots might still be useful to the near-future battlefield is the local control system. Local control involves replacing potentially vulnerable satellites and wireless systems with an on-site team flying in formation with a swarm of fighter drones. The advantage of such a system is that decision-making can still best be done by humans, and being an active part of the battlefield allows for a more rapid response to an evolving combat zone than sitting in a bunker thousands of miles away. Utilizing tight beam communication for drone control also reduces the risk of hacking and comms loss. Humans are also understandably worried about giving up the decision-making process to war machines, and cultural and social resistance to automated weaponry might make the setup more attractive to budget committees. Ultimately, such a system has its limits, and as the capability of autonomous systems improves, militaries will likely become more reliant on them. Chances are in the long term, most pilots will either be an artificial intelligence or, potentially, a technologically improved organic being. There is reason to believe that humans might engineer our future selves for higher acceleration tolerances, especially for groups of people that live and work their entire lives in outer space, where sudden changes in acceleration are to be expected. While the technology of tissue engineering and cybernetics is still in its infancy, there are strong social and economic incentives to pursue such technologies. Altered and improved circulatory systems, mind-machine interfaces, and the ability to replace damaged organ systems with cloned ones rapidly and painlessly would certainly extend the performance range of human pilots, perhaps even allowing them to keep pace with AI systems in zones where high accelerations are more limited, say in an atmosphere where friction limits the maximum speed of aircraft. Another potential development that would extend human performance under high G would be an effective liquid breathing system, because liquids cannot be compressed. A human suspended in fluid and with lungs and other body cavities filled with liquid would effectively experience no net force when under acceleration. Currently, liquid breathing has some challenges. For example, liquids that can carry oxygen to the lungs are not effective at absorbing carbon dioxide, meaning that you could inhale the fluid just fine, but would struggle to exhale in a liquid breathing environment. PFCs and other oxygen-rich fluids are also denser than water, and for the liquid immersion to be effective, the density of the entire system needs to be similar throughout. Since human organs have a density close to water's, the fluid that the pilots are suspended in needs to be nearly as dense as water to get the benefits of negating acceleration. In nature, we do see a solution for the carbon dioxide problem. Embryos survive just fine breathing in liquid, thanks to the external gas exchange supplied by the umbilical cord. An artificial umbilical cord or some other system designed to remove carbon dioxide directly from the blood could feasibly be engineered, allowing the plant to fly in a liquid environment where acceleration will have a minimal impact on their physiology. The density differential will continue to be troublesome even under liquid suspension, however, because some organs are simply denser than their surrounding tissues. The upwards limit of acceleration for a humanoid organism without something more radical like mind uploading, putting the software of a brain onto the hardware of a machine, is likely around 90 gravities, the point where bones begin to structurally fail. At such high G-forces, human pilots might be able to effectively compete with missiles, at least in an atmosphere where speeds are limited. But it does not close the gap in a vacuum, where acceleration and speed are really only limited by rocket technology and the speed of light, because a computer chip can theoretically be engineered to tolerate over 20,000 gravities.